we are tracking. Like, we are not off track. And like, frankly, all of the stupid ideas in 2017 that, or most of them, people thought were stupid, like even NFTs or DeFi or games, like all of these things are coming true. Like it just is taking a little bit longer. So I think you can either myopically focus on like, oh, it's such a bubble and blah blah blah. It's like, you're welcome to short. I don't know what the bear case is, but like, you can knock yourself out. I think you're kind of missing the forest for the trees if that's your perspective.
Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Sei, the blazing fast parallelized blockchain which is unlocking Solana-like performance for the vast ocean of ETH devs out there. Now, you're going to be hearing all about Sei and their new V2 upgrade, but if you take away one thing, the EVM is here to stay. There are some problems with it, which we're going to get into later in the episode, but Sei, and especially their V2 upgrade, is helping solve that. So thank you very much, Sei, for making this episode possible.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer. The views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another Roundup edition of Bell Curve. You got Michael's 1 and 2, Vance. Fellas, missed you guys last week. How you doing?
Doing well.
We're doing well.
Yeah.
Thing. News at some point, but we're cooking.
Yeah. It's been a one of the more eventful weeks in both crypto, but also just, I would say, modern political life in the last week. Pretty nuts, man. Pretty nuts. But before we get into the Trump stuff, actually, I want to give a shout out to I'm wearing some. I was at EthCC last week. Got some Lido swag on here.
Nice merch.
Yeah, it's really good merch. Yeah. I was actually supposed to be delivering this to someone else, but I overslept and didn't end up delivering this. So
Turns
shout
out
out, you know who you are, who's this is supposed to be. So thank you.
It's in the mail.
Yeah, it's in the mail. Yeah, exactly. It's in the mail. But yeah, there was honestly ECC was it was. I know you guys didn't make. Maybe you'll definitely be at con next year, but yeah. Overall, Brussels was like, I mean, as far as cities go, definitely better than most American cities. Maybe not as great as many European cities, but it was great. Like, I saw a bunch of people that I know and like and stuff. Like, I learned some stuff, but it felt very like spread out and fragmented this year. It was a little bit tough to get a sense of like what was going on and who was doing what. But I think in con next year, it's going to be a little bit more. It's not quite as big of a city. It's a little bit more concentrated. So I think con is going to be sick.
I mean, look, this is how we fix, these conferences is like, no one shows up to the side events. So we put more emphasis on the main event and the programming. So I think it's fine. I'm excited for con, pull up south of France. I love that. Of course.
Maybe in a boat.
Maybe in a boat. Maybe a reasonably sized boat. We don't know.
Reasonably sized boat. Yeah, exactly.
Is my point.
You know who made a surprise appearance back to ECC, who I didn't see myself, but I saw pictures, was Suzu.
I heard
he did see
up
that.
the yacht.
Yeah.
Look,
He was at I think I saw him at Rave. That's where I saw him.
hard to believe. Shout out Suzu.
Yeah. Anyway, shout out Sue. All right, let's get into the we're recording this on the 18th, and just 5 days ago on the 13th, there was the first assassination attempt on a U.S. Former president in the last, I think, since Ronald Reagan back in
40 years.
40 years. Yeah. It was pretty surreal to watch. I don't know where you guys were when all this was happening. I was my last night of ECC. I was like, all right, I'm calling this one early. I got an early flight out tomorrow, and I was scrolling Twitter, and I started to see these messages come up. I ended up staying up till like 4 a.m. just reading everything. Slept like 1 hour, but yeah, it was pretty crazy. He was doing a rally in Pennsylvania, in one of these sort of crucial swing areas. He was pointing to. He was doing a talk about immigration and turned and pointed to something that was on the board, and a couple of bullets whizzed by and just scraped his ear. I'm editorializing. I'm sure no one listening to this podcast hasn't seen this. I think it's crazy how little it missed him by. But yeah, what was your guys' just, I guess, like human response to all of this before we unpack the crypto and market side?
Well, I was in the middle of Glacier National Park, backpacking in Montana.
Public service.
Oh
so
my
I,
God.
so I caught up with everything on Sunday.
Wow.
It was actually kind of nice. You just got to like speed run the whole thing. You're like, okay, I don't have to worry about like what happens next. Trump's okay. Like the whole thing. We didn't descend into anarchy. I mean, you talked about it, Mike, but like the 3-dimensional representations of the head turn relative to where the bullet arc. I mean, milliseconds, centimeters. It's not even like feet and inches at this point. We're talking about some pretty crazy stuff. So I don't know, divine intervention, luck and happenstance. This kind of indistinguishable between the two, just in terms of the time, the place, the series of events. But it's pretty crazy to like come out of the woods and be like, oh wow, that happened. This must be a joke. Oh wait, no, it's not a joke.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've had so much political commentary on like the shooting and the aftermath and you know, the meaning of all of it. To me, I mean, I think like we really we went to the absolute brink of, where the country could potentially go into a civil war type scenario. And I think that is, whether you're pro or anti-Trump, I think you can kind of see that pretty clearly. And it feels like now, at least on the Republican side, there's unity, but it feels like there's also more Democrats becoming Republicans just as a result of, maybe it's the policies, maybe it's the pick, but like the physicality of the shooting is pretty wild. Like the bullet missed him by a millimeter. And, I think like what is the most simple explanation for this? People throw out like it's an act of God. There's all these potential. Maybe it just it happened and there was no divine intervention. But like I don't know. Personally, it's hard to believe that this is like a bullet could miss him by that amount. It's just crazy to me. It feels like we are like one idea I've kind of thought through is like this idea of like timeline leap where like post shooting we're just on a different timeline caused by God, caused by whoever runs a simulation, whatever. But like it feels like we're in a very different place right now. And I've found that people post the shooting have started to become more interested in religion, which is pretty interesting. I think that's a symptom of people dealing with this like timeline leap. So no matter what you kind of use to explain it, I think it's impossible to deny that we're just in a fundamentally different place than we were, prior to Saturday, politically, economically, spiritually, whatever. That might be a little bit out there, but I think that's true.
There's a really good. I mean, it's actually an okay movie, but it's like Matt Damon. I think Emily Blunt's in it. The Adjustment Bureau, and the whole point is there's these maps and there's these facilitators of the maps, and the maps kind of lead people down their path or lead people in the direction. There's still some chance for like choice, and you can send people down a different path. Like there's this moment in the movie where they're looking at the book and the Adjustment Bureau is saying like the map has completely changed. I felt like that is the exact kind of way that my head went to what has happened and how the future looks relative to where the past was. And a couple of things that I think lead us in this direction. I think we now have a chance from a bipartisan perspective for unification. And I think that is a lot, at least that's the rumors. And we haven't, I think today is when Trump is giving his speech at the RNC, but apparently that is the new message from his speech, which he'll deliver later today is unification. I think that there's an opportunity to pull in people who previously were on the fence and kind of make it a more clear cut example. But I think it also negates a lot of the arguments that you saw from the Democrats on inciting violence, trying to push one side versus the other. Like this is fundamentally like the worst case scenario. It hasn't happened in 40 years, and we survived quite literally as a institution, as a two-party system, as a government, and I could definitely have seen one of the paths go in a different direction. I agree. But yeah, feeling happy and on the right path. I think the other really big piece of news that came out of this, in addition, not come out of this in particular, but that came out since, is the appointment of JD Vance as the running mate. And I think that obviously something that we can talk about here, but it feels like not calling off the RNC or delaying it, keeping all the trains running on track on the same timeline, and putting someone forward who's younger. He's 39, who's more forward thinking. He's pro innovation, comes from Silicon Valley, and I think has a lot of potential for what the future holds, not only of the Republican Party, but what at least in the betting odds, what the next government of the United States will look like.
Before we get into JD Vance, I just wanted to like the historical comparisons here, just to set maybe level set for folks, just how serious this was, and like the bullet that we dodged here is one. I've showed this podcast a million times, but I'm listening to this podcast called The Rest Is History. They're like 6 episodes into the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and they talk about like Gabriel Princip and how like this sort of radicalization journey that he went through, and what happened in the days after the assassination, how it all happened, and how it led to this crazy war. And I just feel
it was a powder keg ready to blow is like the description that was used to describe what happened, in the Balkans, that led to World War I.
Right. And I think you could actually make a really strong argument that today is even more politically charged than it was back then, because there were these smaller sort of, it was like Serbia and Austria-Hungary. They weren't really happy, but like the major powers, it wasn't even really a huge powder keg. It was this weird like web of allegiances that everyone ended up getting drawn in. And anyway, like regardless of your political allegiances, regardless of just the humanity of not wanting someone to get assassinated, I just think we should all acknowledge that we avoided a much worse, whatever version of the simulation. It could have gotten very bad. And in terms of Ronald Reagan, I think another interesting historical parallel to point out is, so when Reagan, the assassination attempt actually happened, the two similarities are, one, I think he actually got an 8% bump in the polls, which is almost exactly what the Polymarket odds showed for Trump was, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, then what happened in the Electoral College that year?
I actually don't remember.
He won 49 states.
Yeah. So, and the theme there that we're seeing start to emerge that you guys are both just getting at is unity. There's a great quote actually when Reagan actually got shot and he went into his surgeon and he asks the surgeon, are you a Republican, sir? And the surgeon goes, "Today, sir, we are all Republicans." Just a great like American history kind of quote.
No.
But unity.
Dude, I mean, Trump is the second coming of Ronald Reagan, and their campaign slogans, we've talked about this, are identical. Reagan started "Make America Great Again," and Reagan beat Jimmy Carter, as we talked about, who is basically a carbon copy of Joe Biden. Like it's all lining up for this. And you look at what the stock market did in the 80s under Reagan. that was the go-go time of LBOs, and it was the start of the tech boom in some ways with PCs. And I think just like taking a step back of how do people explain what happened here? Like I just don't think it's possible to just be like, yeah, just like the bullet missed him. Like you kind of need to be open to like signs, even if you're not religious, of like, look, like we got right to the brink and everyone saw what it could look like, and now we're back. And like it feels like the US is going to have this probably unified House, Senate, and presidency, a dismantling of a lot of, the red tape and bureaucratic overreach. And it's just really good for the country. And I think people are believing that. And even the guy, like I'm extending my lawn right now, he's the guy's in the fucking cab of this thing, like, bulldozing stuff. And, stopped me and we talked about it. And he's like, yeah, I didn't believe in God before, but like, I believe now. It's like, people are really taking this pretty seriously, which is great. I feel like we've just been in this like malaise of not believing in anything for so long. And that's changed.
I wonder if there's a bit of people like the symbolism thing here is definitely very strong. And I wonder if there's a little bit of a pushback, natural pushback to like some of these big trends about, individualism, like extreme individualism, atheism, that type of thing. It seems like there's a counter push in the other direction. I want to get a sense from you guys of, there's been so obviously Trump's had some pretty high profile supporters for a while, but recently, like Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz came out and said they were supporting Trump. And there was actually a
It's
pretty
a great interview. If people haven't listened to it, the first 30 minutes are not only just a reasoning as to why, but also they dive really deep into why blockchain. I'm
really.
like I've sent that to a number of people who aren't in the industry as a great kind of description as to why politics matter in this instance for the U.S. and for U.S. innovation and why innovation is important. But the first subject they talk about is blockchain. It's like the first 35-ish minutes.
No kidding. All right, I will check that out. I've actually had the challenge of like my physical therapist actually asked me like, why does the regulation stuff have anything to do with crypto? And I had a really hard time
Send it.
articulating it. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. I wanted to get your guys' take. Maybe bring this a little bit back to more markets here. So Mark Cuban tweeted something out, and it's a semi-lengthy tweet here, so I'll just read it, or I can actually just show my screen so everyone can see. But I wanted to get your guys' take on this, and I know Santi and Yana were talking about this as well on Empire today. But the tweet is part one. Here's a contrary opinion on the emergence of Silicon Valley support for President Trump, which, like all my opinions on here, probably won't be popular. It's a Bitcoin play. Not because the former president is a far stronger proponent of crypto. That's nice, but doesn't really impact the price of crypto. It makes it easier to operate a crypto business because of the inevitable and required changes at the SEC. What will drive the price of Bitcoin is lower tax rates and tariffs, which, if history is any guide, and it's not always, will be inflationary. Combine that with the global uncertainty as to the geopolitical role of the USA and the impact of the US dollar as a reserve currency, and you can't align the stars any better for Bitcoin price acceleration. How high can the price go? Way higher than you think. Remember, the market for Bitcoin is global, and the supply has a final limit of 21 million Bitcoin with unlimited fractionalization.
All
Keep
right.
that in mind.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So, what do you guys? What do you guys think about this? Like,
I mean, this is classic Mark Cuban taking a concept, construing it in a way that fits his narrative, and he's also missing the total point. Like, Bitcoin is legal in the U.S. This isn't something that Donald Trump's going to come in and like, we have created Bitcoin and it is now built in the U.S. That what he really should have said is Web3 or crypto writ large.
yeah.
And that I also don't think is something that this whole Silicon Valley bastion of money and power is really the thing that's driving this. If anything, the people that are donating money, Elon Musk, all the like, if you break down where the money is coming from, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, I don't know how much they're donating. They haven't disclosed. They're obviously pro crypto. They're also very pro Silicon Valley, pro American dynamism, and very pro AI. Like, the relative value for them is probably, like, in terms of dollars that they are managing, is probably like 4 to 5 times AI versus crypto. Elon Musk, I mean, other than his like flirting around with Dogecoin and like, he doesn't really care about crypto as much as he does AI. And so it's this whole kind of like, the reason why people are supporting him is probably because it'll be a more friendly environment for innovation in general. It's not particularly Bitcoin. And I think the Washington Post put an article out basically saying like, the thing that's driving Donald Trump right now is all the money that's flowing from crypto donors. It's like, no, like, the most profitable fundraiser that he had was hosted by David Sachs from Kraft Ventures. And the attendees, yes, the Winklevoss twins were there. They tried to donate money. Apparently, they like infringed on PAC rules and had to take the money back the next day. And so, like, they have to, like, it's like the money that was raised was not from crypto people. Like, it has been from people who are much wealthier than crypto people, which frankly are the ones who are going after AI right now.
The things I also, other than that stuff, disagree with from that Mark Cuban post is like, if we're cutting interest rates 25 basis points a quarter, we're not going to reignite inflation. Like, that's just a dumb take. Cutting taxes won't reignite inflation either. Like, the COVID inflation was supply chain inflation, driven initially by just basically the supply chain globally being halted, and then them printing money in the stock market going, like, totally different scenario, not going to happen again. But I do think the essence of the post is correct, where, like, maybe to coin it now, like, if the last kind of cycle meme was like super cycle, I think this one is timeline leap. Like, we're just in a fundamentally different place where like, even right now, Trump announced that there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Like, we are not in Kansas anymore. This is a different timeline. And what does that mean? We've always been pretty consistent. Like, in our lifetimes, Bitcoin to a million, 100%. Does it happen in 20 years? I think that was the prior timeline. I think the, the new timeline is accelerated. More for crypto, more unified. Um, the only thing that concerns me with Trump at the moment is like he's making promises to a lot of people. Is it possible to keep all of them at the same time? I think you can keep promises to crypto and tech. Um, but like there's going to be a lot of other industries that are angling for favor in some way, shape, or form. And even in 2016 he promised the coal miners he was going to bring back coal mining. Coal mining's not coming back for anybody. And so like there's going to be winners and losers here. I think a lot of people are now in the Trump camp, but I think the important thing is that you're not on the losing side. Like him calling out Mark Zuckerberg by name in that tweet the yesterday. I mean, bro, you got to pivot. Mark Zuckerberg needs to pivot because he's coming for you, and that's going to be material to the stock price if it continues.
Hey everyone, wanted to give a big shout out to today's title sponsor, Sei. Now, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why I think Sei is cool from a design standpoint, a big problem that it solves for ETH devs out there, and then some cool stuff that Sei has coming up. The reason I like Sei from an architecture perspective is, again, it's a very fast blockchain, parallelization, all of that stuff, but Sei has essentially been custom building block space, which is for consumer apps and dexes. Now, they have some very cool features which enable that. So twin turbo consensus, optimistic parallelization, Sei DB, all of this stuff allows you to reduce the time to finality, make for very, very fast transactions. So if you're building a consumer app or a DEX, this is basically the blockchain for you. If you've been building in the EVM, you love the EVM, but there are some restrictions about it that don't support your app. So maybe you can't do fast enough transactions or it's not parallelized, whatever it is, you can now take all of that stuff that you built. You don't have to start from scratch and you can build it on Sei. Now, recently they've launched V2, but also public DevNet. So the way that you can follow that and keep up to date is go and follow Sei Network on Twitter. All right. Thanks, guys. I got another question for you guys. It's been loosely floated, right, about the idea of Jamie Dimon being Treasury Secretary. I don't know how possible that actually is.
Take that job. He would never.
You don't think so?
I mean, maybe he will, but let's just put it this way: he has more power in his current job.
Yeah. Much.
All right, and probably the pay is a little bit better too. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just say let's like wave that aside and just as like purely as a hypothetical. Do you think it would be good? I guess from the standpoint of crypto as an industry to have Jamie Dimon, because on the one hand, honestly he's a successful guy. He's very smart, right? Like I think people really deeply respect him. On the other hand, it's not like he's been super supportive of basically everything that he said about Bitcoin and crypto has been pretty negative over. Although he does have a 200-person team at his company, he's always sort of spoken out of two mouths.
It's all two sides. It's all two faces. I think for him, the data really just runs the opposite direction of what he is saying, which is that this so far has been the most successful ETF launch in history, and we have another one coming up on Tuesday, and we are probably looking at a massive investment cycle, not anything similar to the investment cycle that we saw with AI and the development of that industry over the last few years, but we are going to see a financial services driven investment cycle into tokenization writ large. And that I think is something that he kind of recognizes, maybe, and maybe he's gonna like go back and play revisionist history and be like, oh, I was just talking about Bitcoin as like a new currency.
Same thing. Look, these guys are welcome to change their mind.
Right. Even Trump. Trump. There was an article this morning. He said, I was about to ban Bitcoin in 2020. Or 2017, 2018, one of those years. And he was like, then I talked to people and I was like, no, I changed my mind. I mean, people are allowed to change their minds and change their perspectives as they see progress. Like that is how we have progress in the first place.
And like we have the solid, what we didn't have before is like, and I guess when Trump was president last time, it was unclear what MAGA was about beyond this blue collar revitalization. But now it's like this more tech forward party, and that's some of the ideological base and certainly funding sources. And so like people are allowed to change their mind in the context of, the president having a pretty set economic agenda that is tech forward. Because like what's the point of being anti that? And like this all kind of comes down to JD Vance now, and I think Trump is going to be president, obviously, and the figurehead and the commander in chief. But JD Vance is probably going to be like the policy center, and having him as the pick, like it just doesn't get any better than that.
Well, and just to put a finer tooth on that, as an example, we saw what happened with the FIT bill. It went through the House in its current, implementation or current draft. Bipartisan support, 71 Democrats, almost all Republicans voted for it. Now it goes to the Senate. The process in the Senate is there are a couple of drafts that are going to be the canonical Senate drafts. JD Vance is the author of what is thought to be the leading Senate draft on crypto market structure.
Yep.
Think about that. Like the person who is going to put their name behind something is also, and it's kind of implied that whoever, to Vance's point, it's kind of implied the president runs the country, and the vice president is kind of the head of the Congress, and policy comes from Congress, so it's sort of head of policy. And that I think is a pretty strong vote that pro innovation, pro crypto is exactly what you get from a younger candidate like JD Vance.
I've got a question for you guys. How do you see, because the criticism, right, on, and maybe alluding a little bit to can or will Trump keep his promises to everyone? People that are less supportive of this administration or Trump as a guy or whatever say, hey, he's just saying this to you and then he's going to get in and do whatever. What do you guys think would be, like, let's just say Trump ends up getting elected with JD Vance as his VP. What would you be hopeful to see in terms of actual like legislation or change for like the US based crypto industry?
Market structure bill.
Market structure bill. Like, it's very easy to keep promises to crypto. It's very hard to keep promises to an industry like coal mining back in the day.
Where in particular the economics are not in your favor.
Right. And like to get it, so if you haven't read Hillbilly Elegy or watched the movie, it's pretty good. A lot of JD Vance's economic ideas are effectively the dollar's strength, and product surplus dumping in the U.S. has made economic exports from the U.S. non-competitive. And so one of the strategies that he has to bring jobs back to the U.S., and this is all in the context of like how do you keep promises to like the Rust Belt? Well, you onshore things. You have to weaken the dollar. You cannot make things cost competitively in the U.S. if you do not weaken the dollar. And that's part of it, obviously. And on the other side, Trump is saying we want to keep the dollar as the reserve currency, which I think both of those ideas are compatible. And so like, how do you do that? Well, one idea is you intentionally drop the value of the dollar relative to other countries. Part of that is cutting interest rates aggressively. And then how do you keep it as the reserve currency? You distribute the dollar more widely than it ever has been. And frankly, that is stablecoins. And so like I view the economic agenda of revitalizing, the Rust Belt and the Midwest via devaluing the dollar as kind of needing crypto to keep it as the reserve currency in terms of distributing it more widely. So I think he can keep promises to most people. I think where you're going to see a lot of, hey, you said X and then you did Y, or just like frankly, like keeping promises doesn't work from like a free market standpoint is in places like energy, where it's like, okay, cool, we're going to drill more oil. Okay, everyone's drilling more oil. Okay, the price is lower. Okay, we're going to get more nat gas. Okay, the price of nat gas is now lower. Like they're going to have to kind of fight among themselves. But I view the winners of this economic policy as being crypto, tech, Rust Belt jobs, and yeah, I think it's possible to keep all promises.
So here's a question. If not, and I know he wasn't ever really considered seriously, but like who do you think would have been, the next most forward thinking in terms of crypto regulation, like out of all the VP candidates or all the even potential presidential candidates, like, out of everybody that we've talked to, you've got JD Vance, you've got Trump, like what would you say is probably the other one?
I'd say Vivek. I was a little. I mean, I think Doug Burgum is probably pro crypto, but I think he is frankly less concerned with crypto than he is with nat gas, which is the industry he came from.
So with that, Vivek, I would agree. I mean, Vivek has been, at least the rumors have been, he's been kind of helping steer the Trump campaign into crypto as he saw some of the stuff happen with the NFT event. He saw some of, he's basically the one who's helping to liaise with the crypto industry in a lot of ways. So here's a little insight. Vivek is being, at Yale, one of Vivek's best friends was JD Vance.
Of course. Chad's
And
of course.
one of JD Vance's, one of his children is named Vivek. I believe there's something to the effect of JD Vance's wife also helped facilitate Vivek meeting his wife. And it's now rumored that Vivek will be the person that takes over in JD Vance's stead as Senator of Ohio. And so if you think about all of the sort of combinatorial effects of, okay, obviously they're close, obviously they are aligned, politically and with their perspectives on innovation, there's going to be a lot of collaboration. And I think there's going to be a lot of ability to collaborate if a situation like that happens. And I know Vivek has been also talked about as like having a cabinet position, or, how will he be? I think he'll be involved. I think he doesn't have to have like an official position to have influence, though. It's going back to the whole, how do we make sure that this stuff continues forward, and how do you keep promises to these industries? It's about getting votes. And if you put people in positions where you can have those votes who have the same perspectives as you, it's helpful.
So speaking of JD Vance, he put his finger on, do you guys know this guy, Sir James Goldsmith? He was this British industrialist from a while ago. He gave a really influential interview on Charlie Rose where they were talking about inducting China into the World Trade Organization back in the 90s. I'll send it to you guys. It's like 9 minutes to watch, and it's like really worth your time. He's arguing with this. He's basically describing, if you move these low cost labor pools into a trade agreement with more developed nations, everyone's just going to outsource their labor to China or wherever, and like the middle class of developed countries are going to suffer. And there's there's someone on the other side who says, no, that's very small-minded of you. It's actually going to increase exports from the United States to these other countries. And anyway, this guy it's a very prescient sort of interview that this guy gave a while ago. And it seems like that's what JD Vance is really honed in on. He's like, I want wages for working class people in the United States to go up. That's it. It seemed, and that's actually against the Republican orthodoxy of like older generations of Republicans as well, which is, I think that'll be basically what it looks like is the political parties in the US are reforming in real time. I think the Republicans are doing it first, and the Democrats are probably going to have to do it because, as all this stuff is happening with Trump and JD Vance, what's going on with Biden? I mean, I think who I just saw someone call, it looks like he's actually going to drop out now. I think the poly market odds are back at 75%. Was it Adam Schiff who called for his?
Adam Schiff called for it. Apparently there has been a lot of infighting within the White House, and now Kamala's staffers are like yelling at Biden's staffers like it's time to move over. It's a complete shit show. There also is a report out this morning that talks about how Josh Shapiro is who the Democratic donors want to run with Kamala, and he's a strong person. I mean, he's the governor of Pennsylvania. I think he would be. It's sort of like him, Gretchen Whitmer. But I think one of the funniest things that happened. This was just classic political trolling. The Trump campaign, when asked about when they wanted to schedule the VP debate, they said, it's too early for us to tell. We don't want to, until there's a candidate named, we really don't want to, disenfranchise, Whitmer, Shapiro, Newsom, whoever may be that's running with Kamala Harris.
I mean,
just classic trolling.
The reporting now is like, Kamala is like trying to pick like Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania, to be her VP. If I'm Josh Shapiro, I'm like, I'm not. What you think? I'm fucking leaving this job to get in the clown car with you and lose to Trump by like 30 points. Like, I'm gonna wait till 2028. I think she's literally gonna have to pick like Pete Buttigieg or something like that. Mayor Pete and Kamala. It's gonna be. I think the Democrats are like trying to do the right thing, where you can't gaslight your party and tell people that they're not seeing what they're seeing on TV, like in terms of Biden just being basically a corpse. But like they're about to jump into a whole other area. Like Kamala is not a strong candidate at all.
She isn't, but basically at this point, at least in the initial polls that have been coming through, anyone is polling better than Biden Harris right now.
Yes, but like it's like when people were like, "Do you want to vote for RFK?" And then it was like, "Wow, 20% of people want to vote for RFK." He's down to like 3 or 4% now. It's the same thing with like issue polling, where it's like you'll poll people and be like, "Do you support Israel defending its territory?" People will be like, "Yes," and people will be like, "Do you support Palestinians in their struggle for freedom?" People will be like, "Yes." It's like issue polling and hypothetical candidates are like the worst way. Kamala, I'm calling it. If they run Kamala, they're going to lose by more than 15 points in the popular vote. They're going to get.
I'm just calling the polls as I see them. I don't disagree.
No. I mean, I think we just need to see more polling, but like people who are bullish Kamala, I think need to have their head inspected.
I mean, here's the other part too. It's like, okay, the party that is running for pro democracy against anti democracy is going to subvert the democratic process to choose candidates outside of said democratic process.
So isn't one of the challenges though for Kamala is that all that money that they fundraise for the campaign that can
No, she can have it.
She gets it.
she gets it, right? But if they run
Yes.
someone else who isn't Kamala, they don't get it.
Correct.
Right? Like if
Dude, it's going to be Kamala. You cannot basically. It's like Kamala's out there going to all these rallies. Her name's on all the posters. She's like running the campaign. You can't have someone else be like, "Hey, it's Kamala." It's like time to step aside. Let the big dogs.
Also, like you send back $250 million. How much of that comes back to the next person?
yeah,
Like
probably not as much.
there's some break off there. And
Maybe
What's the re-up rate? Probably pretty good.
that's what I mean.
maybe 25%, something like that.
No, it's a lot higher than that because you get super PACs. I mean, I would guess it's probably like 75, 80%. But a lot of that money is individuals, and individuals be like, "Cool, thanks for my like $500 back. I'm not going to send this again."
All right. How much do you guys think that in this we're really waiting away from crypto here, but how much do you think of this is like ego driven, right? This has got to be for everyone involved. I mean, even for
Of course, Biden got snubbed in '88. He also got passed over in 2016 when he was the VP then, and was like, "Nah, Hillary's going to take a shot here." Like he's been passed over multiple times, and he remembers, and so does Joe. Maybe he doesn't remember, but other people in his family do.
dude, who I always think about when I see Biden get on TV and call himself the first black female vice president or whatever is I think about the comms director that was coaching him right before he got on and just thinking like, Joe, here's what you got to say. Here are your talking points, man. Just stick to this. And then he says that and it's like, oh no.
We have live footage. We have live footage of that reaction. It's Anthony Blinken every time he speaks.
Oh really? Oh god.
I mean, have you seen this? The security
no, I
director
haven't seen it. No.
where he is giving a speech in front of Xi and he calls him a dictator.
Oh my god.
I didn't. But I saw him call Zelensky Putin and it's just like dude.
And that reaction as well. It was like
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, dude. Well, Trump's going to be speaking at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville in, I guess, is that a week away? So not that far away. I'll be interested to see what he says. But
look, once again, I don't think Trump himself is like super knowledgeable about crypto. Like just in the same way that I don't think in the '90s Clinton was super knowledgeable about the internet. I think they just understand that these are powerful forces and these are innovation centers. And he's going to talk about how he doesn't want, people are telling me, oh, I need to do this. He yesterday, he's like, yeah, I'm hearing that I need to do a second NFT drop. People want another NFT drop. It's like, they do, correct. But I think broadly, he's not going to be the one who's like, here's how we're going to build this thing better and do it here. And he's not going to be that person, but he's going to chart a path forward to be able to enable the people who know what they're talking about to do it. So
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to, just his presence there is what matters. It's not what he says.
Let's talk a little bit about the market reaction to all of this. So it's been a pretty good week for Bitcoin and crypto markets generally. I think we're sitting at just under 2.5 trillion in total market cap, and Bitcoin's ranging around 65K, somewhere there. And there are a couple explanations for this. I think that this everything that's going on in politics and Trump probably is starting to move markets. People are calling this the Trump trade. But then also we have since found out what we suspected, and I think we're talking about, which was Germany was selling an enormous amount of their Bitcoin. They sold something like 50,000 Bitcoin, and I got to shout out Andy Constant, who's a big FinTwit guy who I appreciate a lot, and he tweeted something out. He was like, "It's only bad execution for Germany if the price retraces steeply next week." And it's like, "Yep, turns out
it
was
did.
horrible." It turns out it did. It was horrible execution. So there's maybe two things going on at the same time.
My favorite point just on that is German came out with a press release and said that they sold it in as market a favorable manner as could be found or something. And it was like, guys, you just market sold and everybody followed you and watched you make those moves.
Yeah.
It's like OTCs.
I saw there was something about like a very like obscure law in Germany where if you hold some asset and it's X volatility or something like that, who knows. Anyway, they decided to sell this enormous, and that explains a lot of the pretty negative price action for Bitcoin. But what do you guys think about? I mean, when does the market start pricing in like a Trump presidency? And people are calling this the Trump trade, and I guess in one sense you could say, well, if everyone knows it and already expects it to be good, could it already be getting priced in? So how do you just view all like the market conditions relative to this news?
Yeah, look, I think it's becoming more obvious. I think you can start to see things like Polymarket and the odds of the next presidency starting to actually drive markets, and you start to see some of these positive movements actually drive crypto, like we saw the last couple of days. There's just a lot of things going on at the same time. Like the 2/3 of the Mt. Gox Bitcoin has been distributed to the platforms that will then distribute to the creditors, and that's supposed to happen before end of August. So I think, or at least through Kraken, which is about a third, it'll be distributed to creditors at end of August. So like there definitely is some supply overhangs, I'd say, in the like short term in the next couple of weeks. But at the same time, we've got ETH ETF supposedly launching next Tuesday, and and we got all the prices yesterday. I think there's some interesting tidbits, also like interesting facts that there aren't differences between some of the pricing structures that we saw with the Bitcoin ETFs. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I would also say macro will also start to take over as well. So the Trump trade is not just a crypto trade. I think the Trump trade is also a pro innovation, but also lower interest rates, as we talked about, the dollar effects, as we talked about. There's just going to be probably a sea change towards risk assets. The other thing that happened last week is money markets hit the most amount of AUM that we've seen since the rate hiking cycle. And I think it was either 14 or $15 trillion of cash just sitting there. And it's not really something that you see a 25 basis rate cut and you're like, oh, instead of earning 5.1%, now I'm earning 4.9%. Like, okay, it's time to get this whole thing out of there. But slowly but surely you start to see the ebb, like the seesaw start to flip, where it's like, oh, I'm earning 5% of my money market. Okay, like risk assets start to appreciate. People expect risk assets to appreciate once you have the interest rate cutting cycle start, because you don't expect it to end. Or at least go to the R star rate, which is probably going to be around 3.5, 3.25%. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of the seesaw effect of cash moving out of money market funds and into other places. S&P 500 even. Risk assets, other equities, crypto. Like there is going to be a massive change in general, and so I think there's like a lot of effects going on simultaneously.
I would add on the macro front, the two other things that the Federal Reserve watches is there's inflation and unemployment. The unemployment rate is starting to tick back up, and the inflation, we got a really weak really cold CPI print within the last week as well. So both of those things sort of give cloud cover for rate cuts from the Fed.
Yeah, I mean, it's 92%, 95% chance of a rate cut in September.
And some of the boomer macro people are like, next move could be a hike. In your toes. It's like, dude. It's like the Japanese soldiers who are like hiding in caves 30 years after the war ends. Like, we're good. Like, we made it. War's over.
Did you see someone tweeted that out about crypto this week? It was like yeah, it was actually pretty funny. It was
The guy who tweeted it has a failed AI startup. So like
yeah. I said I thought that was, I mean, that's a funny thing to tweet. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's do you guys buy into the whole, I mean, it's there's actually a lot of good data around this, but just how Federal Reserve Chairman or women think about rate hikes or cuts or just changing monetary policy at all during when we're close to an election. Like, where do you guys fall on that? Because there's kind of two buckets, right? It's like the data says they don't change it, and then everyone's like, come on, obviously they change it. So
Right.
what do you guys think?
Well,
a 25 basis point cut a month before the election is not going to change the trajectory of what's going to happen.
I mean, look, the other way to think about it too is like, okay, it happens in September. What if it happens in November or December after the election? Both decisions, and nothing happens before. Both decisions are highly political. Like you're kind of like political on one end and political on the back end. Like it's politics either way.
Trump is saying he's going to keep Powell as the chair, though. So, like, ostensibly, there's no like job saving or ending decision that he can make. I don't think it makes any sense to install a new person as the chair. Like, they've seen the entire cycle of inflation and rate hiking. Like, let them do a good job cutting and then switch the personnel. Like, they're halfway through the job of what looks like we're going into maybe a mild recession, but they need to be on top of that. And you can't have like personnel switches in the middle of that.
Yeah, the one part, to that last point on like recession, not recession, mild, not mild. I don't know if we're moving into a full blown recession or if the data is finally catching up to the reality, which is the unemployment rate,
economic picture.
Totally. But like, okay, so the recession, I think, obviously, your stock market is high. That's, as we talked about, the Mag 7, the S&P 493 is lagging. A lot of that is, growth concerns, interest, the cost of money, cost of doing business has increased. Payroll and unemployment rate, every single unemployment reading has been revised downward over the last 6 months. There's whatever the percentage is, I think it's in the 25 to 35% of all new jobs created are government jobs. And so I think, for the private sector and basically the economy, as opposed to the public sector and the government, has been in a mild recession for a long time, and like the last year. And people have felt that across the board. And that's one of the reasons why you're starting to see, the data and the election polls. And so I think it's more of the data is catching up to the reality, less we're starting to like teeter over the edge of something bigger.
I think that's right. I think it's just going to freak people out when unemployment is like 4.5%.
But it gives them the credit to be able to cut and maybe cut deeper.
Yeah. Also, 4.5% is still pretty historically low for unemployment. It's not. People used to say, economists used to estimate that was like the actual zero for unemployment because there's always going to be some percentage of the population that doesn't want to work.
Yes, but like unemployment rate, if you look at it over time, it trends. It's like a momentum stock. Like it doesn't hit, it doesn't go from 3.5 to 4% where it is today and then stop. It kind of goes up and it takes time to bring down, and like usually it's like pretty hard to bring down once it starts going up. So maybe the unemployment rate today, the real one, to Michael's point, is like 4.5 or 5%. But that means they need to cut rates pretty aggressively. And maybe it's 25 basis points a quarter. But once they do the first few cuts and there's no new inflation, I think they're going to have to be like, all right, where are we actually? Where is the neutral rate? Where is the unemployment rate? Like, sure, the stock market's at an all-time high, but like one interesting thing I read this year is Larry Fink's. He does like an annual letter, and his whole thing is like, look, like maybe the jobs come back, maybe they don't. We can only control the employment picture to a certain extent, but what we can control is the U.S. stock market and making sure that everyone is wealthy and the assets that we have, are still the globally sought after market, New York Stock Exchange, Nasdaq, etc. And so his whole thing is like higher asset prices are good. Like we shouldn't view these as something bad. And like compare that to Joe Biden, who's like, I'm not a stock market president. I think like a lot of the economic rhetoric from devaluing the dollar, from being tech forward, is pro stock market. Um, and I think that will save certain people. I don't think it saves crypto. I think it just makes the case that much more strong. I think for some industries like SaaS, they're like lower interest rates will help them, but I think there's still questions around like how many more marketplace SaaS companies do we need? How many more B2B SaaS products do we need? Like some of these industries, it's like coal mining. It's just like the end of the road. And I don't think SaaS is over by any extent, but like probably a lot smaller than it was in the 2010s.
Yeah. And I think that there's also the effect of, so one thing I was thinking about yesterday, um, we're at pretty low tax receipts. And a lot of the reasons why are having to do with lack of facilitation of growth, I would say, or facilitation of industry, particularly M&A. And one of the big things, so let's say, Figma was able to be bought by Adobe, bought it for $20 billion. It was actually 23 when all was said and done. It means the US government's taking on average 25% of that. The California government, is taking another 10% of that. And so if you clear a path for M&A and you start to charge those markets again, you can actually have real tax receipts. I mean, $4.5 billion from one transaction on one given year. And then there's hundreds of them. There's like that I think also is another boon to the government and tax receipts, while you're also stimulating the economy and lowering. I mean, Trump has said he's going to come out and lower corporate taxes, and I think that you're going to start to see asset prices inflate because you're going to lower corporate taxes or keep them at the same level. You're going to have higher tax receipts because you're going to invigorate the transaction of these businesses, which has basically been stopped for the last 4 years. And so I think this is kind of setting up for a lot of opportunity, not just in assets, but also in what is the government able to put that money into, and whereas they haven't been previously been able to collect it.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a rotation going on over in stock market land, by the way, to small caps. So like large caps, like the Mag 7 has been trouncing everything for a very long time. And there's a little bit of like that's the stock market rotation right now. That the Trump trade is a rotation into smaller caps. I also am, I'd be curious what you guys think about. I know, Vance, you're just talking about B2B SaaS. I've always been a little bit of a skeptic about how much SaaS we really need, especially someone who pays for a lot of B2B SaaS. But the other thing is the AI sort of trend, or depending on how you want to describe it, a little bit of a bubble, right? Like there's an enormous amount of VC funding going towards that. NVIDIA, I'm not sure if it is now. I think it's sold off a little bit from the top, but at one point it was the most valuable company on earth. How much do you guys see? I guess last thing, I'm starting to hear people call for like, hey, we've invested $100 billion of CapEx into AI. Like, what's the requisite revenue that we'd need to see there? And I think people are starting saying, we don't really know what the model is going to be here yet. Like, I don't know if we can just charge everyone $20 subscriptions to ChatGPT. So where do you get, what's your most recent thinking on AI and where we are in that kind of hype cycle?
I mean, it's funny that the same infrastructure versus app, I would say complaining, is playing out in traditional tech as it is in crypto. And I think like the left and right of bell curve take is just like, look, infrastructure is super valuable. If it's infrastructure for the AI boom, or if it's infrastructure money like Bitcoin and ETH, like infrastructure is valuable. And so like I kind of see putting the crypto complaints in the same light as the traditional tech complaints kind of makes you just lowers your blood pressure around the whole idea of like, man, is infrastructure so overvalued? I don't think that is the case. I do think it is the case that like, look, for all the trillions of dollars of value created, 90% of the revenue, for all the trillions of dollars of market cap that have been created in AI, which is mostly in NVIDIA, most of the revenue, probably 90% of it, is being generated by OpenAI at the moment. So like, you got 3 trillion or whatever NVIDIA is, 2 trillion or 3 trillion of value, and you got 4 billion of revenue that's attributable to that. Will that always be the case? No, but I think, the revenue so far is small. That doesn't mean the infrastructure is bad or you should be bearish that infrastructure. What I've personally noticed is that I use Perplexity probably once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week for like deep focus research, and half the time it's wrong, but like it helps me. But like I've canceled ChatGPT. Like these AI apps kind of have this high burnout rate if it's not super contextual and targeted. So I've heard the take that OpenAI is the AOL online of AI, app startups. I think that could be right in the fullness of time, and that in and of itself would be devastating to the venture case for AI app investment.
Uh, I'd actually take the other side of that, just in the fact that if that was the case, it would give way to the next Yahoo and then Google. And so you'd have to assume that if it is the AOL example, like there are others coming that take the lead and kind of supplant their position as the lead, and those will be funded by venture firms. And I think there's a article out of Sequoia Capital, and I think it's named Stephen Kahn, who wrote an article called "The $600 billion Problem."
This is
Um,
this is what I was referring to. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so everyone who is interested should go read it. But basically, it says the infrastructure investment, and he has some math. Basically needs to pay back. There needs to be 4 times as much revenue per year to pay back the infrastructure.
Right.
And so where is that coming from? And you've got hundreds of billions, what will be trillions of dollars going into infrastructure for AI over the next whatever 5, 7, 10 years. And I totally agree. It's the same thing that's happening with blockchains, which is like, where are the apps? Where's everything? Well, okay. The thing that we spent the last 5 years or the last, I don't know, 4 years since DeFi Summer working on is taking Ethereum and bringing it down to the point of $1,000 a transaction to a penny a transaction. Like that is fundamental over the last 4 years. AI is probably going to go through a similar thing where right now ChatGPT costs 10 times the amount of compute power to process one equivalent Google search than Google search. We'll probably see similar orders of magnitude improvement, which will enable new applications and make them more approachable and easily consumable because they're not as expensive to run. And so I think we're in this like, this also happened in the 90s too. And this is what everybody is using as the mental model for how to think about this. In the late 90s, everybody started plowing billions of dollars into broadband build out because you can't run, a Netflix over a dial up or AOL where it had to like do like connecting. You're online, you've got mail. Like all that bullshit was how everybody connected to the internet back in the day. And then 56K broadband Ethernet cable, and then T1, T3 lines became the standard. And now everybody has, basically zero latency internet connectivity everywhere in the world. I think that similar build out will happen, but that's what people just had to invest in the 2000, 2001, 2002 as the internet was crashing. And so everybody said, oh, this is over. Like this is dumb. But that infrastructure build out enabled the resurgence of what will happen. And so maybe we're kind of like crest piercing the first edge of the AI bubble, where you're starting to see, okay, the application isn't there yet. The infrastructure build out is still happening, but like it's too much money. And so maybe people start pulling back some of their investment. But I think that, that ultimately will lead to the enablement of AI because the investment now will have a payback period. It's just like decades in the future. And so you can't line these things up perfectly because you need infrastructure before you can have the app.
Yeah, and on the whole apps versus infrastructure, Yano got called on. He went on the Chopping Block, and they were talking about this as well. And I think I was just listening to Haseeb talk about it with him, and I think that people kind of incorrectly point at VCs and they're like, hey, why are you guys funding this stuff? And it's like, look, you get like, this is the way that I feel about that is the same reason people incorrectly assume that like media has a lot of like leeway to produce whatever we want. Like actually Anatoly at the last Permissionless was like, hey, why aren't we talking about apps here? Why is there all this infrastructure talk? It's like, my job is to go out there and see what people want to talk about and then present that to them. Like, I could produce a whole conference about applications, but it doesn't mean that anyone would watch it or come. And then who's winning, right? And I mean, you guys know the craft of VC much better than me, but it's kind of like, all right, in a sense, like your world of opportunity is the entrepreneurs that you guys see and have the opportunity to fund, right? So I think it's kind of a dumb critique to be like, VCs are the problem here. It's just like, I agree. There's just like, this is where we are in the industry. Like, we needed to build a whole bunch of infrastructure, right? But because I have also been calling for more apps. So to defend my worldview here is just that eventually, at some point, now that the block space is cheap, we do want these things, because in my opinion, the best way to win hearts and minds of people is to like make experiences that people actually love, and that's going to do an enormous amount, because all the stuff that we've been talking about maybe there's a specific market structure bill and maybe there's some piece of legislation that Trump and JD Vance are going to push through. Honestly, I would settle for just entrepreneurs not worrying about getting arrested in the US, which is literally the concern, right? Like, that's the bar that I have personally. And so I think if we got that, if entrepreneurs weren't worried about living here anymore, and if there were a couple apps that people had in their pocket that they were like married to, like TikTok, I think that does just so much for the industry.
We have apps though, like we got 7 million monthly DeFi active users. We've got probably 50 million monthly active users on chain. Games are starting to scale. Things like Polymarket are breaking into the mainstream. Financial services are real. Stablecoins are.
Shout out for hiring Nate Silver, by the way, to
Yeah,
Polymarket.
Like,
That was one of the most impressive hires I have.
we are
That was
tracking.
nuts.
We are tracking. Like, we are not off track, and like, frankly, all of the stupid ideas in 2017 that, or most of them, people thought were stupid. Like even NFTs or DeFi or games, like all of these things are coming true. Like, it just is taking a little bit longer. So I think you can either myopically focus on like, oh, it's such a bubble and blah blah blah. It's like, you're welcome to short. I don't know what the bear case is, but like, you can knock yourself out. I think you're kind of missing the forest for the trees if that's your perspective.
but to be clear, I don't think things like DentaCoin are going to be coming back. The coin for dentists. Well, but also, just a little like history here. The internet got started with cats on the internet and like Star Wars guy, and then infrastructure became so low cost that you were able to upload your own videos to YouTube. You were able to like host your own blog. It like having your own website was something that cost you $9.99 a month, or even like $59.99 a month way back in the day. But like, you bring down the cost curve and you start to see like all the different ideas explode. And that's where we're at in crypto. We have been over the last 4 years. I think we're starting the same infrastructure build out cycle in AI. And so it'll probably be a couple more years for us to be able to have an application where it's like, boom. Like, to your point, Mike, something is as big as TikTok. Okay, well, first off, I don't think crypto is going to have a consumer application appeal in the same way that TikTok exists. That's for the core internet. But AI doesn't have an application like that as well. Like, there aren't the same levels of viral loops and feedback and mechanism. Like, ChatGPT gets shit wrong all the time. Perplexity, same thing. So we're still so early days in all of these things. I think it's just important to go back to politics. Is the internet is what has been driving growth. Look at the Mac 7. It's what's holding up our economy in so many different ways. And if we snuffed that opportunity out in the mid 90s, late 90s, I don't know where we would be as a country now, but it probably wouldn't be in the place that we're at right now. We wouldn't be able to be making the same decisions when it comes to social good, communities, how we're going to spend money, how we're going to defend ourselves, what decisions we should be making. We wouldn't, because we'd be struck with not being able to have an opportunity to make decisions. And so I think that is the overarching point here: is low regulation, pro innovation is how we have the opportunity to have these industries flourish in the future.
One last comment on like market stuff. Michael and I have a mutual friend that works at one of the big pod shops. And this week I had a call with them and just talking about markets, life, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, dude, this week I took all of my shorts off. I just don't feel comfortable anymore. This is the first day in almost 3 years where it felt like 2020, 2021. And I think you see that with some of the rotation into small caps and rotation, in and out of tech, whatever. But like, it feels like this was the week where people said like, okay, what, like, Trump has a probably greater than 80% chance to win. Like, what does that mean for the future? And I think it's like, it's just bullish. It's bullish technology, which is great because I don't know if the tech industry or the crypto industry could survive another 4 years of Biden. Or at least, not with him at the top of the ticket. Who knows what Kamala's, yeah, like, who knows what Kamala thinks? But I'm glad that we're in a different place now.
I've got one more, maybe to end on a more crypto-centric note here. ZeroX Jim tweeted out this thing about Blast this week, that they changed their handle from being an L2 to a full stack chain. And I think it's unclear, like a lot of people interpreted this as they're like, because a lot of people like to say, oh, the L2s are going to leave Ethereum and they're launching their own chain. I think it's less clear that that's actually happening and more that they're going to vertically integrate parts of their ecosystem, like have like a native wallet and things like that. And I would just be curious. We talked a little while ago about the maybe stratifying world of L2s where you've got the front runners in terms of, volume and activity and TVL, like the Arbitrums and the Optimisms of the world. And then you've got some of these new entrants, which are choosing different vectors to innovate on. So Blast, I think, they actually did a really good job in innovating on distribution. Like they had a pretty novel like native yield, and they attracted a bunch of TVL. And now it looks like they're going to have like a more like owning the full stack of a user once they get onto Blast, which I think is pretty interesting. Mega ETH is also doing something around this, right? They're basically, cranking the, if inheriting ETH security allows you to be somewhat centralized, they're just cranking that shit up to 11 and making a really fast, cheap sequencer. So I would love to get your guys' updated thoughts on just like L2s in general. Do you see it barbell between like the early winners with network effects and some of these new entrants who are innovating on distribution or on innovating? And then if so, who do you think is innovating in an interesting way?
I think the network effects of these L2s are going to be less strong over time, just given interop and the proliferation of apps across chains is going to be default multi-chain. I think the winner here is still ETH. Even in the sense that, like, sure, Mantle becomes, I don't even know what an L1 versus an L2, whatever, but like all of their TVL, all of their activity, all of their pairs are denominated in ETH. And like over the long term, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Like even Solana is now, they're funding L2s.
Mm.
Like you cannot force people to stay on your chain forever. Your only choice is to use your money, use your base currency as money, proliferate it across the L2s, and drive network effects and valuation from the use of that currency as money. And so, like, will OP be the token that all the L3s are denominated in? I don't know about that. I just like, it's just like, and we've studied Solana and its DeFi ecosystem. Like it's really hard to bootstrap your native asset as money. Um, and so, like, again, I think a version of the world where there's 1,000 L2s and they all use ETH as currency, and sure, they cannibalize some fees. That's like part of the long term plan, and everyone will face that at some point, no matter what speed, cost, throughput your chain is. The prognosis on L2s, I don't know. I don't know if they're actually ETH beta. It seems like the unlocks that people keep trying to stand in front of keep blowing them up. So I just don't think, I don't think buying a basket of L2s is the same thing as owning ETH or Bitcoin or even Solana in the case where they have a lot of L2s.
I think there's an interesting analogy with like traditional technology as well, and just as like a little history. So the most successful enterprise platform I would probably say is Salesforce. Just the ability that they've been able to get the lock-in value that they've had with all of their customers. Like they have just built this amazing platform. It's like their API platform. So much so that like truly their software looks like it was built in the 90s still from a UX perspective. Everybody uses it. Everybody loves it. and Dreamforce in San Francisco here is like it's like a week where the whole city kind of like has to shut down because there's so many damn people around.
How many people go to Dreamforce? Like how big
it's
is
like
that conference?
tens of thousands.
Wow.
It's
That's
crazy. But I would say, so in 2012, 2013, when I was at Dropbox was like, oh, we're going to build a platform too. Like we're going to get all these apps to build on top of our platform and it's going to be great. And they're going to use Dropbox storage. They're going to be Dropbox customers for life. And guess what? didn't work. And there's a lot of reasons why Dropbox also had other issues, but I think it's a similar process where everyone's like, like we're going to do that too.
We're the platform. Twilio is
We're
the
the
platform.
We're the platform. And like when Twilio used to say every the TAM is every company that has cogs is our TAM.
So every company.
We will serve services to every company that is paying for services. It's like, okay. But the broader point is everybody looks at the best in class and they're like, oh, we can just do the same thing. We can run the same playbook. And in reality, you can't. And there's only one best in class for a reason. And they've been able to get there. And I think that that's a lot of what is happening with this whole like, oh, the L2 is becoming the L1 and therefore like it's going to disintermediate the L1 and be full stack. In reality, it doesn't understand how it became an L2 in the first place, which is off the back of the L1. And I think that sort of like misunderstanding is, and maybe someone will be able to traverse it, but you either have to be full stack from the start and be able to build a community, frankly, like Solana has been able to do to date, or you have to recognize your position in the infrastructure stack and recognize that you're built on top of ETH, and you're probably not going to be able to do all of the things that ETH can do and all the other ecosystem participants do. You're just a part of it. You're not the whole thing. And so, I mean, that's broadly how I would describe it.
That's a very, very good analogy. I like that. And like the alternative, I think the other path is you become a hyper specific app chain focused on one thing, and you do that one thing well. That's probably like you play this out like long enough. It's like Dropbox kind of went back to being like a photo sharing, file sharing app in its core. Maybe that's like the Farcaster chain. Maybe that's like the gaming chain. But like again, like you need to bootstrap your TVL and value from somewhere. And like a lot of it's just going to be the base currency. So again, I think like the over bearishness on infrastructure kind of conflates like maybe like bad infrastructure projects that have launched with like the fact that infrastructure is the most valuable category in crypto.
Also, like you have to, it's better to, like I know you guys both think, like launching a bunch of tokens actually does end up, it's like free market competition, right? To figure out what the best solution is. Otherwise you end up with like a centrally planned type solution. Like the Bitcoiners kind of did this with Lightning, right? Like, I don't know. My sense is that everyone kind of coalesced around this like state sponsored, intellectually, endowed solution. And I still don't really hear people say, yeah, this just doesn't really work. So I don't know. I think that maybe what some people react to a little bit is how chaotic it feels like with all these different solutions. But at the end of the day, a couple of these things are going to win out. And it's probably better to have free market competition than state sponsored.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's like same thing as EthCC. You want less side events? Okay. Have a conference with a bunch of shitty side events. People will no longer throw them. Welcome to open source free market capitalism. Like this is what we're doing. This has always been the plan.
We should do I guess to end on ECC, shout out to I didn't actually go, but Barachain I heard absolutely murdered it on the side events and community. Also heard great things about Monad, and I did go to Modular Summit as well for Celestia. They did a really good job pulling people out. So maybe other people had different interpretations of like what the best ones were, but I thought, yeah, Barachain, Monad, Celestia did a good job at ECC this year. I didn't see Eigenlayer. I hardly saw Eigenlayer. They had a huge presence at ETH Denver, and I didn't see much of them. But
I think they're shipping.
I think they're shipping too. It's actually bullish. I think it's super bullish, Eigenlayer, actually. So, all right, fellas. I think that's just about it. Anything else on your guys' end?
No. Enjoy the day.
All right. Fun one, guys.
Later.
See you next week.
See ya.
Hey everyone, want to give a final shout out to this episode's title sponsor, Sei. Now, there are a whole bunch of really exciting reasons to be building on Sei V2 outside of just parallelization. I want you to head over to sei.io to looking into building on their public DevNet. Again, click the link at the bottom of this episode and head over to sei.io to start building something today.